Marcos Neto, you're here at this big event. Thank you so much for finding the time to chat with me. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm tired and I'm hot.
Tired.
It's hot in Seville, and this is a reminder. I was in an event today with the president of Andalusia, which is the community, the autonomous community here, and he reminds everybody that this is very unusual.
Yeah, I think it's the record-breaking heat.
Yeah, this is climate change, reminding everybody why we need to finance development and the Paris Agreement.
Yeah. Okay. Excuse this very cheesy sequitur, but do you think that this is helping make progress here at the event? How do you think things are going?
Look, I think, let me put it this way. We got here with a consensus, right? The Compromiso de Sevilla. And that is really good.
Yeah.
It's really good news that we arrive here with a deal among 192 member states, consensus, covering almost every single important aspect of a comprehensive agenda to finance development, climate change in all aspects. Second, I think it's very important to realize that the Compromiso de Sevilla builds on the Addis agenda. There is no backwards on the Compromiso de Sevilla comparing to the Addis agenda, right? So 10 years later, in a much more complex process, well, remember 10 years ago, the word was, very much closer together, agreeing the Addis agenda, agreeing the Paris Agreement, agreeing the SDGs. Today's a different word. We haven't gone backwards. Right?
Stood still a bit, though.
In certain areas, yes. In certain areas of Compromiso de Sevilla like that, there's not as much progress as we hope and as we know is needed.
Right. And climate?
Well, climate, the Compromiso de Sevilla differs to the new FCCC process, to the results that came out of Baku, and to what's going to happen at the end of the year at climate at COP30. But the fact that I think you might know more than I think the presence of climate in the Compromiso de Sevilla is stronger than climate was. So it's the same as the biodiversity that they were in the Addis. Right. Even though it's a recognition that there are other mechanisms and other conventions that deal with this. But I think it becomes clear that those issues have to be brought together.
So a big theme of this conference is the role of private finance, right? And I mean, in your position at UNDP, part of your goal is to kind of bring together these different forms of financing, right? But I worry that there's not a lot of evidence to show how effective some of these private finance interventions can be in developing countries and vulnerable developing countries. Yeah. There's a lot of risk, which we need public finance to address. Why shouldn't developing countries sign on to something or get behind something that's so reliant on private finance?
I think there are three pillars, if you want, of what comes out of Seville, right? Domestic resource mobilization is a big deal. And I think in the geopolitics of today, it is kind of clear that, you might as well want to take charge of your financing thoughts and your financing strategies, and you actually have to deal with your taxations and your budget, your expenditures. I don't think there is another way to look at this, right? And I think for us, at the United Nations Development Program, it is important that we are very much squarely working with governments, more than 50 around budgeting, the integrate national financial frameworks, which were half a sentence in Addis. We gave it with partners to life in 86 countries. We want to take to 100 countries, giving them the country ownership. And that country ownership, I'll come back to it, remind you of that. The second one is ODA still matters, right? 0.7 is there, and ODA still matters. A doubling of ODA to the domestic resource mobilization.
Yep.
And we can't forego that. But the truth is, Jess, even if we were in the same international spirit of 2015, we always know that the Paris Agreement, the SDGs, we're always going to need private capital. right? There is not enough public finance. There is not enough ODA. At the peak, ODA hit $270 odd billion.
Yeah.
We're talking about a gap of $4.3 trillion. However, a global economy with more than global wealth with more than $450 trillion. So the so-called gap, which is in a number big, it's 1% of the global economy.
Yeah.
Right? So we have always known that we would need the private capital. Right? I think the Compromiso de Sevilla makes more explicit than Addis. Right?
Okay.
Makes it clear that we understand and that the private sector understand that it has a role, but it's not corporate social responsibility.
Right.
It's not whatever color of washing you want to give in green or whatever color. It has to come in with integrity. Now, one of the things we are very proud of is that the Compromiso de Sevilla recognizes the work that we are doing as UNDP with ISO, the International Standards Organization, on the first ever sustainability management standards for enterprises, for companies. Now, 53,001 should be launched at the end of this year, right, to try to bring the private sector. But you're right. We also need to figure out about the risking. We need to give the private sector an enabling environment in developing countries that allows them to do. We work a lot on the kind of de-risking through policy, but we do need the MDBs and we do need the DFIs to come in with the right financial instrument, which is not necessarily lending to certain countries more into the guarantees, more into the first loss, so the private capital can come in.
But how do we, I understand the argument of needing private finance and de-risking and all that, but how do we make it actually work for the main needs of these countries? I mean, you have this idea, the new launch at the end of the year with all these guidelines, the ISO, but how do we know that private companies are going to take that on and actually apply it?
We don't.
Is there new ideas for this, though?
No, the truth is we don't. And it's not just us. You have the ISSB, you have others, you have some governments that are doing mandatory, you have others that are slipping back. There are changes everywhere, right? But the truth is, you have to put it in place, the tools, right? The build that they come. There are some companies that are legit wanting this. There are companies that want to do the right thing, that more than they do the right thing, they want to make money. And there is money in the sustainability agenda. There is money in doing the right thing. Right? So, you know, I think if you combine the risking policy and financial instruments with pipeline development, another one of our platforms, together with the Italian government, is refer in the Compromiso de Sevilla to design documents, projects with rules of the game, with regulation, you know, with standards. I think it's a nice combination, right?
What's the timeline on this? I mean, we have a lot of urgency in debt, we have a lot of urgency in climate. Well, this sounds like a great idea that would take a really long time. So how do we speed it up and also make sure that these companies are integrating some of these standards?
Look, I think business opportunities are there to be taken. That brings, sharpened minds. So that the risk inside, which doesn't have to be a long-term, can open doors. The pipeline can open doors. I also think the companies are thinking strongly right now, right?
Yeah.
And actually, let me take this to a different way. Because private capital is not just companies. Private capital is the capital market.
Of course.
We've seen how much appetite the capital market has in buying thematic bonds. Right? Again, there was very little on that back in Addis 10 years ago. Very strong on the Compromiso de Sevilla, thematic bonds, sustainability-linked bonds, SDG bonds, green bonds, and everything else, right? So again, great opportunity, huge potential. We ourselves have been involved in $50 billion of issuance, but you got to deal with the debt.
Yeah.
Because also, a lot of this movement towards thematic debt instruments were born out at a low interest rate world. We're no longer that low interest rate world. So we need to deal with the debt, and we need to actually deal with the cost of capital to make sure the countries, and companies from the South can actually benefit from this desire in the capital markets to buy thematic debt instruments. The other thing is equity, right? We need to have more equity products, right? So the flows into developing countries need to be flows that are not only debt, but also equity in that aspect. Look, I'm optimistic by nature. We've known each other for a while. I think Seville is a moment of optimism, right? A few weeks ago, we didn't know if we would have a deal, right? Multilateralism is under stress, but keeps delivering, right? What keeps delivering? What is possible?
Yeah.
Not, could we have a better deal? Yes. Right? Could we have every country in the world in here? Yes. But at the end of the day, we've got a damn good deal into the moment that we live in. And we need to celebrate that.
What's the threat, though? I mean, obviously, the U.S. is not here. And the reason that countries were able to come together on consensus is because they left, right? Otherwise, this one had to go down to a vote. Is that... And it seems like it would happen. We don't know. We don't
know what would have happened. Right. What ifs, we know what happened.
What happens when, the U.S. does show up? Is there concern that, countries will move in this direction? They've come to this compromise, but then you've got the biggest economy in the world not involved. And so is there concern about, what the future means for that?
No, I think the Compromiso de Sevilla has enough areas that appeal, specific areas in there that appeal to every member state. Right? And I think member states are going to carry on talking to each other. And, it's a sovereign decision.
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't mean that every member state, they agree to the consensus like equally everything that is in the consensus.
The compromise.
It also doesn't mean that, the country that didn't sign up doesn't agree with certain things in it. Keep on talking. Keep on finding ways to create synergies and to bring people together.
I know, you don't have a lot of time, but I just want to talk briefly about domestic resource mobilization because UNDP is really involved on the kind of local offices throughout the world. And so we've been talking about domestic resource mobilization for a very long time, but it doesn't feel like it's truly worked. And so I'm wondering, has anything changed here in Sevilla or in the lead up to Sevilla to try and harness some of those local powers?
Look, I'll take issue with is not working.
Okay.
If you look back in the last 10 years from Addis to Seville, on average, tax to GDP in developing countries has gone up. Right? On average, new instruments like those thematic bonds that we're talking about, the whole global environment that was created on that, right, has taken hold, right? And issues have come. Even countries that are below investment grade are accessing market on thematics, right? I think there has been a huge movement. We have seen it. We have worked it, a huge movement and seen governments being more deliberate into looking at their budgets against the national policies. We are seeing a whole movement on more ambitions, NDCs 3.0. The NDCs 2.0 for Glasgow were already better, right? All of the end. I would argue that the appearance in the last decade of the integrated national financial frameworks, right, which we are very proud to have given life to it with OECD, DESA, UNICEF, Sweden, Italy, EU, has allowed governments to, in 86 governments, to starting to own their financing strategies. And from that, money is flowing. 17 countries that have an INFF, $50 billion have already flown, right? Yeah. So I take issue that the domestic resource mobilization thing, it has improved. Now, well, I think not as slow as you implying here. Now, I think the question is, the needs have grown.
I see.
Right? So whatever improvement, it doesn't match the needs. And then at the same time, what has grown is a debt distress situation, right? An increase in the cost of capital right? So whatever happened, but it's just enough to build. We need to build bigger. We need to build faster, on the domestic resource side. We need to deal with illicit financial flow more. We need to deal with governance. We need to deal with corruption. We need to deal with things that are in the Compromiso de Sevilla, right? The one thing that I think is very important in the Compromiso de Sevilla, and for us and the work that we do in 170 countries at UNDP is fundamental. This document truly consolidates the notion of country ownership.
Yeah.
Right? There was a genesis of that notion out of Addis Ababa.
Right.
Now, it's smack in the middle. Right? Countries need to own the NDC, and therefore they need to own how they want to finance this NDC. No more northern or private sector or international organizations coming in and say, that's what you need.
Yeah.
Seville, it's about transferring that responsibility, yet the ownership to each country, and then finding private sector, UN, MDBs, others to come in solidarity with what they want. The INFFs are that tool.
So, last question, but how do we accelerate this? On Monday, when, we're all home and well rested, what happens next? How do we accelerate all the promises that are made in the Compromiso?
Just double down. Take it back to the INFF, right? 86 countries. We want to go in the next 18 months to 120 countries, right? How do you connect Seville to COP30? Seville is about implementation. The Seville Action Platform is about implementation. My home country, COP30 presidents, Brazil, wants to make Belém the implementation of NDCs. So you've got a connection here. So let's get to Belém, build it on Seville, and get out of Belém with implementation, right? The bond market is there. They're buying anything. Yeah. Let's create more issuance. Let's bring people together. Do more and more so we are able to accelerate the flows of resources. Let's make more and more public development reforms, right? So we can actually get people domestically to see the value, right? Taxation reform, domestically, very important. Globally, how do we move the UN Tax Convention? How we combine the BEPS work of Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 with everything else coming? So I think there is a lot. We tend to spend a lot of our time in today's world saying what is missing. Actually, there's a lot going on. If we can just kind of speed up what is going on, we'll be fine.
Well, thank you so much, Marcos. It's always a pleasure.
Thanks, Jesse. Great to see you again.
You too.
Thank you.